Hello, everyone, and welcome to our information session today, all about Fielding's PhD in psychology with an emphasis in applied psychological science. We're very glad to have you with us today to learn a little bit more about the program. Before we do get started, I want to make just a couple of really quick announcements here. First, we are recording today's session, so we do ask that you leave your camera and microphone turned off just during the PowerPoint section of the presentation today. We will have time for questions and answers after we go through the PowerPoint as well. And so at that point, you can turn on your camera and microphone and we can have a little bit more of a conversation as well. But as we're going through the PowerPoint, we do ask that you keep those turned off. And then we will also have the chat available. So if you have any questions as we're going through, you are more than welcome to post in the chat as well. So without out of the way, we can get things started here. I'm Brian Wallen. I am here as Fielding Senior Admissions Advisor for this program and our School of Psychology programs. Here we also have my colleague Trevor Copeland on Fielding's admissions team, and I'm very pleased to introduce our program director and professor for this program, Dr. Nora Reilly. Dr. Reilly, thank you so much for putting on this session today. I will go ahead and hand things over to you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Hey, everybody, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your interest in fielding. As Brian said, I am the director of the program. I'm also a professor here. Before we begin the slide presentation, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am what you will call an organizational social psychologist. I trained in basic social psychology at Dartmouth. That's my PhD. And I immediately retrained in an area of applied psychological science, industrial and organizational psychology. I am more organizational than industrial, but I know both. I have taught at Colorado State University, Washington State University, Radford University. I have had a small consulting firm as an organizational psychologist. I've been a faculty member in a few places, and I've been a dean. I have been at Fielding since the fall of 22, so it's really only the beginning of my third year here. I have an applied research interest. It's emotions in the workplace, things like organizational commitment, job satisfaction, the things your supervisor does that make you crazy. Those are the kinds of things that I study. I am at Fielding because I want to, share my love of psychology with other people who want to take these basic core principles and then apply them to ask and answer a question of interest that is personally relevant to them. That's what I do, and that's what this program is about. It's not the organizational part, it's asking and answering a question based upon solid methodological principles that let you explore an area of interest that's near and dear to you. Let's go to the next slide, which is kind of like a picture postcard. But first, let me tell you something about Fielding. Fielding was founded to help other people find their path within psychology. It was founded to share the love of learning with working adults who want to change themselves. Working adults don't often have the opportunity to go to a brick and mortar institution. Fielding itself is very student-centered, and we understand that working adults have adult needs and responsibilities. It's different. We use a distributed learning model, and we use distance learning technologies. Our learning management platform is Moodle. If you've heard of Blackboard or Canvas or Desire to Learn, it's all the same kind of thing, just slightly different bells and whistles. Our courses appear in a Moodle shell, but they are not canned. That's where the materials for the courses reside. There are opportunities for in-person meetings for nearly every course. And we expect that students will, in fact, engage in those in-person, but they're virtually in-person. We'll call them synchronous meetings that you participate in online. So you get the opportunity to engage with faculty and to engage with your peers, your colleagues who are on this journey with you. Most of these courses have synchronous meetings, once, maybe twice per week. It depends upon the nature of the course. Sometimes it's every other week for a couple hours, and they span a 15-week term. We actually have 3 consecutive 15-week terms. One starts in May, that's the summer term. One starts in September, that's the fall term, and one starts in January, that is the spring term. There's no summer break. These meetings are recorded in case life gets in the way, and that does happen more than we like to think about sometimes. Now, Fielding itself is nonprofit. It is regionally accredited by the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. That is the regional accrediting body for all schools up and down, colleges and universities up and down the West Coast and going inland a little bit. Other schools that are accredited by this body are the University of California system, the Cal State system, Stanford, Pepperdine, Occidental, you name it. If it is a school that has as a package a set of programs that are worth their stuff, they are accredited by a regional body. And that's what that is. We are not an APA accredited program, even though we are a program that teaches psychology, only psychology doctoral programs that involve treatment, learning how to treat people in clinical or counseling or school psychology. Those programs need to be accredited by the American Psychological Association. We don't do that. My PhD at Dartmouth, I'm not accredited by the APA. That's different. That was the Northeastern Association for Schools and Colleges. It's a different concept. Fielding itself has a social justice mission. We want our students and our graduates to make an impact on the world, and that seems to be particularly important now. We are recognized by the Carnegie Foundation for Community Engagement. And now, referring to the picture postcard, our main office is located in Santa Barbara. I've never been to Santa Barbara, unfortunately. Santa Barbara is in the upper left hand on the postcard. Just below that is our grants office in Washington, D.C. In the far bottom right corner, well, that's me there in Radford, Virginia. I live in a sleepy little town, and I like it like that. I grew up in Jersey City, in New Jersey. I've lived in large cities, and I decided I didn't want to commute. So I lived and worked here for over 30 years, actually. The other places kind of illustrate where our students come from. You have San Francisco, Chicago, San Diego, New York. You have Guam, you have the Philippines. I have this background on today. A year ago, I was working remotely from Australia and New Zealand. That is the Cook Strait behind me. I took this picture. That is the strait between the northern island of New Zealand and the southern island. And it really is that blue. So today's a blue day. I like blue. Right? So the next slide talks a little bit about who this program is for. This is a program for somebody who you're probably working, probably full-time. You want to be present with other people, but you can't actually go there physically. And you don't want to necessarily do a program where you just do a whole bunch of learning modules and submit them and get, occasional feedback. That is not what we do. We want students who want to be present with others, people who want to engage with others to maximize what you can learn in a PhD program. The program gives you a chance to become an expert in some field of psychology so that you learn the core principles of psychology. You then learn a rigorous set of methodological principles, and you learn how to ask and answer questions of relevance to you in your life and your job in your own world. We use what is called a scholar practitioner model. So after learning the core areas of psychology, like social, developmental, biological, cognitive psychology, multicultural, what you then do is apply that to some unique question. When you contribute uniquely to the research literature, to the science of psychology, you essentially earn a PhD. Our students typically practice what they preach. Examples of what our scholar practitioners have done is take social psychology and apply it to organizations. That's me. I have a couple of students who study leadership. We can apply social and cognitive psychology to the law. You've all heard about bias and eyewitness testimony, juror decision-making, and things like that. We can apply psychology to marketing, right? The Super Bowl was yesterday. No matter where it was ranked, I still like the Budweiser horse commercials best. Always. I mean, really, it's a classic. You can apply psychology to environmental change. That is an important issue right now. Yes, we have climate change and we have to do something to get people on board to address it. So all of those are examples of how you apply basic principles of psychology to a particular question of interest to you. So this next slide talks about possible careers. You can become university or college faculty. There is a sequence of courses that walk you through the teaching of psychology basics and give you some practicum experience, all virtual, all online. You can become an independent researcher for business, for healthcare, for the government, or think tanks. It depends upon what industry you're interested in and what kind of job you might have now. You can be a consultant within a particular field. I mean, I was able to start my own very small consulting firm with my background in order to address some questions of particular interest to me. And those questions actually revolved around healthcare. I was very interested in not just studying healthcare, but the role of nurses within the healthcare setting and how organizations treat them and what the consequences are for patients. That's what I like to study. But the bottom line is that you can become an expert within the field of psychology. So let me emphasize that while we can engage in these practices, like for me, practicing organizational psychology within healthcare settings, this program does not lead to licensure. Licensure is something regulated by the states, but it is only used for people who treat folks who need clinical counseling or school psychology services. They are diagnosed, a plan is drawn up, and they are treated. We do not do that. You may not take this degree and do any of that. That is not our focus. That's not legal. Don't do it. States have different laws for licensing, and depending upon where you are, you would need to look them up to see what your limits are. But pretty much, you can't do what I just said. Also note that this program does not allow you to conduct research on clients or patients, anyone who falls into the dysfunctional realm. Because we are not clinicians within the program, we do not conduct research on people who need treatment. We can study a number of things that fall along a continuum. I'll give you an example of that. Many people are interested in the studying of narcissism as a personality trait. It's not one of the big 5 personality traits, but it's pretty common. We all know what it is. Well, narcissism really ranges along a continuum from being like, yeah, just like your typical person. And sometimes you're kind of proud of some things, maybe you shouldn't be. And other times you're just over the top and you think you are the best thing since sliced bread in every setting, anywhere. We don't study those sliced bread people. We study the people like, people fall along a continuum. How might narcissism affect your decisions and your relationships? That stuff's okay. And there's an awful lot of things that fall into that end of the spectrum. So let me talk a little bit to you about what the requirements are for the program. This is a 79 credit program, and it's broken into 3 groups of courses. It is in its utmost lightning turbocharged speed able to be conducted in 3 years. That's a lot if you're working full time. More realistically, you're going to talk more like 4 years, but it can be done in 3 years, and it's 3 continuous terms per year. We start all of each of those 3 terms, May, September, and January. And talking about the degree requirements, let me start with the core principles of psychology. They are on the right on your screen. You will take courses in developmental psych, social psych, cognitive psych, biological bases of behavior, which is another word for neuroscience, multicultural psych, and then the history and systems of psychology that set you up to study these more modern questions. In addition, you will take a set of courses, which are in the middle, which constitute an area of focus. It's not a concentration per se, but it's kind of like one. It's not a formal concentration. It's an area. It's typically 3 courses or 12 credits in which you get to really become a more specifically engaged in some area. If you want to be a professor, you want to take the teaching of psychology sequence. I can tell you that hiring committees want to know that you have been trained in teaching. We are developing other formal areas from among our electives. One of them, for example, is positive psychology. We'll combine positive psychology with neuropsychology with health psychology in order to talk about both mind and body well-being. Another area would be forensic psychology. We're not talking about clinical forensic psychology. We're not talking about diagnosing serial killers and stuff. We don't do that, remember? Nope, nope, not what we do. But forensic psychology is basically psychology in the law. So it can be eyewitness testimony, it can be just plain decision-making, juror decision-making. There are a number of things that can be intertwined within that focus. Okay. Now, the thing that is more unique to this program is that we have a heavier emphasis on methodology, research methods, and statistics. Now, many people will say, but I don't want to be a statistician. And I will say, you will not be a statistician, but you will learn how to use the tools that are required to analyze the data that you collect. You need to become a critical consumer of the scientific literature. And in order to do that, you need to be able to read it and understand it on your own and not just take people's word for it. So you'll need to take statistics. Essentially, you take 2 statistics courses, 2 research methods courses, a course in applied measurement, which is how do you create a psychological assessment? Like you've all taken like marketing surveys. You've all taken like some kind of an attitude survey. You've all taken some kind of a personality assessment. Well, how do you make them so that you are sure that they are valid? You don't want to use a test that isn't valid. And as somebody who's interested in applied psychological science, you need to know where measures come from and how to evaluate them carefully. You also have 2 research requirements. One is a year-long research practicum sequence. You typically start that in your first term. This is a project that you engage in from start to finish, where you justify a set of predictions or hypotheses, you design the study, you identify valid measures, you submit to the Institutional Review Board request to solicit data from human participants. You collect the data, you analyze it, you write it up, and you present it at a conference, or with some luck, you submit it to a journal for publication if the data turn out reasonably. Right? That's a big deal. This first year research practicum gives you a much firmer foundation, a much better skill set to have behind you before you pursue the dissertation. Now, the dissertation always sounds scary, and it's not that scary, but what we know is that folks who come into the program have probably been out of school for a while. If they've had statistics and research methods, they've forgotten it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure about that. I mean, if I haven't been teaching it for 40 years, I probably would forget it too, right? But you need to be able to answer these questions using psychological science, the methods of psychological science as your guide. So what you wind up doing for the dissertation is saying, I already have a firm grasp as to how research is done. And that makes the transition to conducting the dissertation that much easier. Otherwise, it seems like it's intimidating, and it need not be. So let me give you a little example of this in just a bit. When we talk about these required courses. Right? What we typically do on the turbocharged program is you'll take 2 formal courses and engage in research every term, up until about your 6th term, where you start focusing more on dissertation. But when I talked about these courses, I kind of color-coded them. The core principles courses, like social psych, cognitive psych, developmental psych, those are red. The stats and methods courses are blue. The research activities are purple, because I like purple in addition to blue. Right? So when you look at this, you essentially have each term a red thing and a blue thing and a purple thing, which is actually the color of my shirt, but that was unintentional. In your first term, we would enroll you in social psychology in the first research methods course, and then set you up to work with a research supervisor from our core faculty within the program. That would be kind of what you would be doing each term for the first 4 or 5 terms. You start to interject some green things into there. Those would be your area of focus courses. And eventually, you just wind up doing purple stuff, your dissertation. So we have this sequence laid out here because since you can start in any of the 3 terms, I don't want to put a particular date for when they start. Your first year begins with the first term that you're there. And then you just figure out the dates moving forward. That is a sequence that I've had now several people just about complete. But most people will take longer. And one of the things I want to kind of bring up here is how this is the turbocharged sequence. You probably will take longer. And what I haven't done is talk about where our students have been placed. This program was initiated in the fall of 21. It takes, in my estimation, over 3 years. We just passed the fall of 24. I have people who are now finishing. Several of them are going to go back to their current practice of whatever it is they're doing. Several are taking career transitions. Some want to go into teaching. I can't point you to a career office for this program yet because the program is just graduating people now. Otherwise, that's a good source of things to ask about, right? What have your students gotten jobs? Because I know that you're interested in that. Okay, so in running the program, please keep in mind that it isn't just checking off courses. You must be engaged in research. It's a different mindset. Also note that we will award a pathway master's once you complete a specified combination of 33 credits. That would be 5 of the core courses, 2 of the methods courses, and that 3-term research practicum, so that you get some reinforcement along the way. Now, this research practicum thing, I'm not talking about that a lot because it's important to set up the mindset that we need people to be interested in research, that they need to want to ask and answer a question, not just take a bunch of courses. There is no legit PhD program that just has you take a bunch of courses. So I'll give you an example of this little tiny house here. What I'd like you to think about is that your first research experience at Fielding is like a tiny house. You know that they're cute, you know, they're in the yard, or they're in some, you know, little neighborhoods, and they're tiny. They look like a garden shed, but this is a very fancy one. It is well designed. It has lots of light. Doesn't have a foundation though. Your research practicum is getting you familiar with the points of construction and architecture, design and conducting research, where yes, you need to ask and answer a question that is well designed and that you can kind of live with it. But it's not your dissertation. It might help lead you to the dissertation, but it need not do that. And I'll tell you that's going to depend upon how much research experience you have in your background now. So a tiny house is you're asking and answering a question. You're conducting a research project from soup to nuts that you own with the supervision that you get from one of the core faculty members, right? You get to build it, you get to live in it, you get to say, I did that. Okay, about the dissertation. Let's talk about the dissertation. Don't panic when you hear the word dissertation. When I think of a dissertation, I'm thinking about that structure on the left in this slide. I stuck with modern architecture. I took the modern architecture of my tiny house and I took it to build a larger structure that has a solid foundation. The dissertation has to be based upon a theory or model. It has to be structured so that when you start it, you have a flow to it. The interior is well appointed. Ultimately, you can take this dissertation and you can add on to it, but you don't need to do everything all at once. It is just a real house. That thing that's on the right, that thing that looks like a cruise ship sailed into the side of a mountain, people are thinking that's the dissertation. That is not the dissertation. You don't want to think about that. Dissertation is not a shiny castle on the hill. It's something that you can get done that is very well constructed with a solid foundation. It is well appointed and you can build on it. That's a dissertation. It is not as intimidating as people think it is. And it's interesting. So the tiny house thing, let me give you an example of the kind of research that would constitute a tiny house. I have a student who was interested in whether the physiological reactions to an out of order or unexpected death were different than for someone who had a natural life progression and passed away. And we know that there's grief. Grief is a normal part of life. But is there literally a physiological difference? There is. Well, she's taking that, her practicum, and in fact, it was just accepted for publication yesterday. I'm so happy. No, Friday, because today's Monday, right? And she is now moving to take that to add a stronger physiological component. She's actually taking some other physiological measures and observer ratings of the person who is bereaved, right? Well, that's pretty cool. I have someone who is looking at whether disclosure of a disability, a cognitive disability like ADHD, in an informal interview helps or hurts them. Well, we know perfectly well that it hurts them. Never disclose a disability. Like, you don't need to unless it affects the basic functions of the job. You need to perform the essential functions of a job. Well, this student was interested in whether having the exact same information on paper, right, a resume, a cover letter, people do occasionally still require cover letters, whether just hearing the word ADHD affected the evaluation of a recommendation for hire. And it did. Now, we expected it was going to. That's why we posed the question. But the question is now, how do you remove that bias? From the part of the organization, you use what is called a structured interview. Not just an open-ended set of questions, but you have behaviorally based answers where raters who make hiring decisions are trained to recognize the behaviors that constitutes an excellent, an okay, or not so good answer on some kind of an interview question. So he's extending that. Here's a problem, here's how to fix it. The fixing it part's going to be his dissertation. So we have a number of projects like that that people work on, where for the dissertation, I have somebody who is just interested in whether face-to-face video contact differed depending upon the angle in which you tilted your head. Because we don't look into screens these days. Some cameras are better than others. And she didn't want to do that for a dissertation, but she wanted to learn how to conduct research. She did actually a simple experiment. Participants were randomly assigned to watch someone in one video condition or the other. And they were both the same video, but taken from different angles. So the content was exactly the same. The intonation was exactly the same. The person in the video was exactly the same. Did we perceive that person differently? Yeah, we did. Okay. So those are just examples of potential practicum projects. Okay. So we go from practicum, we go from the tiny house to the normal house, and we don't go to the cruise ship in the side of the mountain. We don't need to do that for a dissertation. Save the Nobel Prize for later. And just get the dissertation done first. So let me move on from that and just bring up some points about, program delivery. Everything is delivered at a distance. You do have some opportunities for in-person, face-to-face contact at things that are called sessions, but there is nothing required for face-to-face contact. Most class meetings are synchronous, but they are recorded. And the faculty are really very engaging. They want to talk with you. They want to help you learn how to ask and answer the question of interest to you based upon psychological principles and psychological scientific methods. Okay. So, thing about the program, in summary, is that it's unique. We have really, really good faculty. You get to choose your own area of focus. You do have an opportunity for some independent studies. We do have a social justice emphasis, and the program can be completed in 3 years. But I'm going to say, you don't necessarily want to think like that. Okay, so when we're done, we will turn cameras on and whatnot, and we'll be able to have a question and answer period.